All right, we are live. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pete Fletzer, the host of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars Fan Talk Show. Hey, listen, if you're joining us tonight, first of all, thank you very much. That means you're a patron. That means you've been with us and you're along for the ride. And I really appreciate everybody who comes and hangs out with us. But you'll notice that the music and the intro is not with us tonight, and the primary reason for that is I lost a whole ton of data today, and I'm getting over it. I'm dealing with it. I'm going to be strong, but no fancy intro today, but we're still going to we're still moving on with the show. And when you listen to it on the podcast, you will never even know that anything has changed. That said, I am super excited to bring you a conversation this evening with one of the girls with Sabers, Luthien, from the show. The show's been around for about 3 years, and we are going to have a great conversation about all things Star Wars. So thank you so much for joining us. Right now, I see Matthew and JD, a couple other folks in the chat. So thank you very much. Feel free to throw your questions in there and we'll see if we can get to them. But right now, I am really excited to bring you Luthien from Girls with Sabers. Luthien, how are you?
Good. Glad to be here. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. Yep, it's only one half of us.
Yes, it's
And
half of Girls with Sabers, but
unfortunately,
yeah.
but Emrys, like I said before, sends her best, and I will be manning the helm.
Excellent. So maybe for those that don't know the show or aren't familiar with you, maybe give us a little bit of background about you and Girls with Sabers.
Yep. So Girls with Sabers it'll be 3 years this June. And it just was born out of a love for not only Star Wars, but the sequel trilogy. And Emrys and I met in comment sections throughout the just Star Wars community, being on the YouTube community. And we started messaging each other back and forth, and tons of similar likes and interests. And one day she said, "Hey, I have this idea and I'm wondering if you want to start." And I'm like, "I will do whatever you want me to do." So Girls with Sabers was born, and it has evolved into what it is now. And our main basis is YouTube, but we're all over social media as well. And we do podcasting, we do live streams, we do video essays, video edits, and yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It's funny. We were talking before we got on about how you kind of jumped in right in the early stages of 3 years ago, which is kind of like the on ramp for this explosion
Yes.
of Star Wars content and YouTube. Now, so
For better or for worse.
yeah, explosion is probably the best possible word for it. Yep. Can you hang on 1 second? Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on 1 second. Is everything okay? Hey, what's going on? I will tell you what, since I have gone to this this non-live format, I've had more interesting things happen as I'm recording. We had some burnt toast downstairs, and so that ended up making me ask some questions.
The recording's just so hot.
That's right. That's right. Luthien's here. Bam. Yep. Fire alarms going off.
I can't help it.
It's funny. So we were saying that you had gotten in just as sort of this on-ramp of Star Wars content and social media and whatnot has been going on. And but so what was your introduction to Star Wars? You said you got together with M through your love of the sequel trilogy. But when did you get into Star Wars for the first time?
So for me, it was the original trilogy, and it was actually my mother. And I have a about 7.5 year older than me and my twin sister, half brother. And when my mother and father were married, my brother was around 7 years old, and Star Wars was humongous, late 70s, definitely early 80s. So you had cusp of Return of the Jedi. And so right before my sister and I were born, it was Return of the Jedi. and they re-released all of the films in theaters before this came out. So my brother took my mom, his
Mm.
stepmother, and she was just blown away by this. And he had action figures and all this stuff. And she's like, this is amazing. And she's like, I can't wait to share this with my daughters. So had to have been 90, 91. And I remember going to the video store when they existed back in those days.
Yeah.
And it
Yep.
wasn't Blockbuster. It was like your in town, like,
Yeah, Joe's Video
mom and pop.
Shop, right?
Yup. Exactly.
Yep.
Selling more than just VHS. But anyway, so it's like you never went into like the
Yeah.
back room with the
What's
beats.
behind that curtain over there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I remember bringing home the VHS of A New Hope, and 7-year-old me is just, what is this? This is amazing. And you think now, it's like, oh my God, showing a 7-year-old Uncle Owen and Aunt Rose's burnt bodies. You're like, oh, would I do that to my kid? But I remember just sitting there going, oh my God, their bodies are burned. And I'm so I'm not excited about that, but like just the whole thing in
Yay,
general.
dead bodies. No, that was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
wrong.
But but my mom sat and watched it with us and, explained some things. But other than that, I just fell in love with it.
Mm,
And we did it all. We did the whole trilogy. And then anytime it was on TV, it was one of those films where you stop everything
yep.
and you watch it. And that carried me, and that was one of my first real introductions to the realm of fantasy, and I wouldn't even call it sci-fi. I
Mhm.
mean, you can. I mean, some people put that moniker on it, but yeah, after that it was just a wonderful love with Star Wars. And the prequels, I was very much in high school and then out of high school by the time those all came out. So I did see all of them except Phantom Menace.
Mm.
I excuse me, Phantom Menace.
Yeah, not Phantom Menace. Oof.
Freudian slip.
Yeah.
So, uh, Phantom Menace, I remember we rented the DVD of, and I've never seen it all the way through. I'm gonna be honest, I've never seen it all the way through.
You've never watched wait, you have a
I have
podcast and you've
seen
never seen The
I have
Phantom Menace all the way
seen
through.
I have seen The Phantom Menace.
Okay.
I have seen the whole film, but I have not seen it from start to finish all together.
Interesting.
It's one of our things is we're gonna like sit down and actually do it with all of our stuff. And I've seen Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, as much as I need to. But yeah, Phantom
Is it
Menace.
because you don't love the movie? Is it because it just doesn't maintain your attention span, or is it?
It is because a little book was introduced to me called The Lord of the Rings around that time.
Mhm.
And my focus completely shifted, and I mean completely 180'd. So that's really where my focus went in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then hearing about the sequel trilogy, I got super excited again.
Yeah.
And that just kind of went on from there. But I have no one but my mother to thank for introducing me to Star Wars.
That's great.
And my brother too, I guess, by proxy. But
yeah, it's interesting because I think it wasn't too long ago there was some social media activity going around, people asking, did anybody's mother introduce them to
Yeah.
Star Wars? And it was kind of interesting because a surprisingly high number of people have been introduced, and I think it kind of goes to that misperception, and maybe it's misperception is probably the wrong word. It's probably more likely to be older way of thinking that I mean yes, literally my father introduced me to Star Wars and Close Encounters and all that stuff, but
Yep.
I think that there's still this belief that oddly enough, even with the high percentage of female fans in the Star Wars base, that it's still a boys franchise in many ways, at least when you think back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But so I mean that's quite interesting. Do you think that because your mother introduced it to you, it made it easier for you to kind of get into it without feeling sort of outside?
I think so. I think for me, because a woman introduced it to me, I already had that feminine perspective
Right.
right there sitting with me watching and explaining, and not that I didn't watch it with my brother or my father, because I did,
Mhm.
um, but my mother was the one who was home with me and my sister, so she's the one we watched it with, and I never ever had the problem of gatekeeping, not until I became a content creator,
Mhm.
um, finishing Star Wars, going to school, telling my friends about it. I mean, we all kind of loved it, and sure, like I was able to kind of play in both courts where
Mhm.
I had my girlfriends and we all did that stuff, and then I had my guy friends, and just group in the group of friends, but they all love Star Wars and they had their playing cards and their action figures, and I'm like, but I could keep toe to toe with them as to what was in the original trilogy and what they're talking about. I'm like, "Oh, I know that, and this happened, and no, you're remembering that wrong. It's happened this way." And I just watched it yesterday, but they were all very welcoming about it. It's not like they tried to make me prove how much of a fan I was. That's never something that I experienced. I know M did experience that. That was a very big juxtaposition when we've explained our Star Wars journeys to people, is where I did not have that in my friend space. She did.
Mm.
She went to school. She, told her guy friends, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I watched Star Wars." And then they would question her. So I can't come from that place of no, because it didn't happen. I just know that it did happen for people, but it did not happen for me. My experience with other fans and friends was very welcoming. And once they pulled out their Star Wars cards, I was like, nah, I'm done, and I'm going to go over here. And, but yeah, but I did, I'd sit and watch too. That was also not a big deal for me, but it was very welcoming. My Star Wars experience growing up was very healthy, if you want to put it that way.
So interestingly, so you kind of were able to pull all the pieces together, but it was, I go back because I saw Star Wars in 1977 when I was 7 years
Hmm.
old. When I was writing for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, it was the 90s, and I was also starting to spend a little bit of time at conventions and things like
Hmm.
that, because that's where things were starting to, there was no Star Wars celebration. I had to go to Star Trek conventions. No
Right.
offense, but quite a different experience.
It's a
Um,
different star.
yeah, yeah, or interestingly, a lot of horror conventions, things like that, different places where people were playing, and where Star Wars showed up. I mean, I met Ray Park at a
Mhm.
at a horror convention in New Jersey, because that was, can you imagine him not having a line and just being this guy off to the side at the horror convention? And yet, you put him somewhere now, and people will wait and wait. But what the point I'm getting to, there's actually a point here, is over those years, I started to see what first started out as being sort of, and there's no way to say this without it sounding awful, but a lot of women with their boyfriends were kind of being dragged along, or
Mhm.
incredibly over sexualized women at these conferences. Now, again, it wasn't a Star Wars celebration, it was a horror convention, or it was a sci-fi thing where
Right.
it was a different world. But now I did not go to Celebration in Chicago, but from what I understand, there's been quite an evolution of the fan base there. And
Mhm.
so maybe tell me a little bit about, did you experience, before we get into the sequel trilogy and some of the
Right.
issues there, but did you experience gatekeeping even before the internet had taken over the Star Wars conversation?
No, none. And that's the
Hmm.
God's honest truth.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that goes, how do I think because Leia was such a strong character and
Okay.
such a strong female lead and presence in the series, that I never had a problem. I never felt that I never sat there watching where are all the women.
Right.
You know, I
Hmm.
I watched the film. I love Luke. I love Han. I love Lando. I loved Leia. I loved it all. And I just in you know gr- as I evolved into a mature woman and continued watching these films, and so my perception of it is also evolving, and my perspective, both.
Right.
I kept thinking, there don't she's carrying the torch, but it works.
Right.
It works. And this story is more, of course, Luke's journey than anything.
Mhm.
Luke and his father. But her character was strong enough to carry this, and it was strong enough to carry my love for the film. So when I went to friends and we talked about it, there was I'd say everything I loved about Leia, and we kept talking, but it helped that I also loved everything else about it.
Right. Right.
Ewoks, Lando, Boba
Mhm.
Fett, everything. Um, I guess I was just very fortunate that I never had the type of friends that, quote unquote friends that thought that my enjoyment was somehow inferior.
Hmm.
That I wasn't, just because I'm a girl means that I couldn't enjoy it as much as they could.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. I think the position that Leia played in the trilogy, the original trilogy, made her, and it was also a different time where people weren't necessarily looking for it. And I know that sounds wrong, but the fact that she was there was actually, one of the first interviews I did was with a really good friend of mine. He's an author named Bill Pricestock, and he
Mhm.
talks about how seeing Leia in 1977 was like, wow, this woman kicks ass, and we haven't seen
Yes.
that before. And without Leia, you don't get Ripley and Aliens. You don't get those strong female characters, and it's carried through. But what's interesting is I think for people like me who I consider myself very fortunate, but I also recognize that I'm in this very weird sort of generational cusp in that to me, strong women characters don't mean anything, right? It's not a negative or a positive. It's a good character, right? Hey,
Right.
there's a great woman character in this movie. That's awesome. Oh, Leia is she's the one that saves Han and Luke on the Death Star. That's great. Cool. I don't care if it's her or Chewbacca or C3PO. It was a character.
Right.
Um, but you definitely could. I can understand where people were coming from, and you seem to have come in through that. Now, the internet and the sequel trilogy came together and exposed where some of that ugliness still is. I love your sort of tagline, which is pop analysis from two women with compassionate hearts and sharp minds.
Mhm.
Talk to me about why you feel like you had to start in that position, or is it, and to say to feel like you had to start there, I'm making an assumption, but it feels like there might have been a need for you to create a space that you wanted to expand. Am I right in making that sort of assumption?
Yes, definitely. Because women can be more than just one thing.
Right.
And I think that's why, I mean, you can have a sharp mind, but you can, and wit, and a sharp tongue, but you can also be compassionate. And I think that a very important thing for everyone to remember. Male, female, you identify as male or female. And so many times, women in general, and especially women in fandom, can be compartmentalized,
Hmm.
put, pigeonholed, put into a stereotypical box of, only liking one thing or only having one view about
Hmm.
certain things. And I know it was very important for us to let people know that we can stand strong in this fandom, but we still have compassion for other people and other people's viewpoints. And so
Right.
that's why we really had that tagline in there.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
So for people who've seen the phrase but may not know how it's defined, talk to me about the phrase feminine gaze, and what does that mean as far as storytelling goes, and maybe then also specifically to the sequel trilogy.
Did you say nerd gating?
No. um,
No, sorry, you were breaking up, so it's like
oh, it's okay. No, talk to me about the phrase feminine gaze. I think there's a as a perception, or as a wrong word,
Mhm.
as an a way to tell the story, or a mirror to put up to the story.
Right, so even though Leia is a huge part of the original trilogy, we really didn't see a majority of the film play out through her eyes
Mm,
and through her perception. So that's what a feminine gaze is. We finally get in the sequel trilogy a main female character, and we are seeing everything through her lens, and especially leading up to The Last Jedi. She asks she asks a pretty important question.
mhm,
What is my place in all this? And we're finding out her fears, and we're finding out her strengths, and we're finding out her weaknesses, all in the span of 2.5 hours.
mm,
And it's hard to get an action packed film with the gravitas that Star Wars has, where it is through a female lens. And yes, we had Padme in the prequel trilogy, but that still wasn't feminine gaze enough. It was still very much through Anakin's eyes, through Obi-Wan's eyes,
mhm,
male dominated. Um, but if anyone is ever going to understand the female side of things, you have to look through a feminine gaze. And you don't have to be feminine or female identifying to, hit the nail on the head.
mhm.
What Ryan Johnson did is he listened. He
Right.
wrote, but then he researched and he listened to many women who were probably in his ear, or female identifying people, and went, okay. And he got it. She didn't want Rey didn't want to be a Jedi. She just wanted belonging. She wanted to, you know, for someone to come back for her.
Mhm.
She didn't grow up pretending to be a Jedi and idolizing Luke. She idolized Han, the smuggler. I mean, that's who she identified with.
Right.
Um, so being a Jedi was never on her radar, or being powerful. She just wanted her family back.
Yeah. And so to tell the story from that it's interesting because you're right. I think even where the hero of the story is female, we still quite often we're looking at her versus seeing the story from her perspective, and I think that's a really interesting thing. And why do you think that caused, or was that the cause of some of the riff in the fandom?
I think because we're not used to seeing that.
Mhm,
And if we're used to seeing what they're doing instead of what they're seeing and what
mhm,
they're feeling. A big femme gaze film would be Wonder Woman. It's one
mhm,
of the biggest ones that people can remember. And in the first film, Diana finally getting to the earthly realm, and she sees that baby, and then she starts cooing the baby, and she goes, "Oh, baby!" And people
mhm.
lost their shit over that. Like,
Right,
she can be both. Like, she can be a strong woman, but also coo over a baby.
right.
But that is the feminine gaze.
Mm,
That is her longing in the second film. Her longing for Steve, and um and her finally coming to terms with losing him and then learning how to fly. That is femme gaze.
mhm.
It's a very powerful scene. I really didn't care for Wonder Woman 2, but that whole sequence, chef's kiss,
Yeah,
Patty
yeah.
Jenkins, that was phenomenal. That is such at its feminine core, to have to get over such a grief, and that helps find yourself. I mean, we all deal with grief, but I think it's a very feminine thing at its core to nurture and to want to protect and care for the things that you love and the things that are around you.
Mm,
And when you can't do that, when you don't have those things, or those things have never been there, or you lost them, um, some women do brush it aside, but a lot of women will that is a very inward pain,
Yeah.
a
So
very inward ache.
yeah, no, I
Mhm.
definitely I understand. That's great. A great way to define it. I think
Mm.
if I'm hearing you, and I think this is really important, and maybe this is why it's a challenge for certain people, is that it is it's that ability to tell the story with a female centered story and not leave out the parts that make her her, right?
Right.
It's not making Ray a male character that happens to be played by a female, right?
Right.
It's actually taking into account and showing that, look, I mean, the romance that that was alluded to in The Last Jedi, and I say
Mhm.
alluded to only because it never really was completed by JJ, right? So we could talk about that in a moment as well.
Yeah.
But just that sort of, that she cared about Luke, she cared about Kylo, she cared about Chewbacca. Like she had that other side,
Yes.
which is kind of difficult when you're looking for a gladiator with a sword and killing monsters. Like that's a very sort of masculine approach to the character,
Mhm.
and kudos to Ryan Johnson for being able to soften that character. I mean, I think, speaking of Ryan Johnson's expertise, I think what he did with Knives Out is a very similar thing in that,
Yes.
why can't I think of the main character's name? She was amazing. Anyway, the protagonist
Yes.
yeah. But
It's lost on me right now too.
yeah,
It's
I can
okay.
see her face.
Yep. Anna
And
de Armas, I just can't remember who she
yeah,
played.
right.
Yeah.
But she definitely, you saw not just, okay, I'm in trouble, how do I deal with this, but you got a sense of who she was as a person, and
Yes.
that's a different thing. But so back to my first question, why is that difficult for a portion of the fan base to handle? And I don't expect you to have the ultimate
Mm.
answer, but I mean, what it did was it caused people to sort of branch off. And we talked a little bit earlier about, you and Em are very into the what has been called the Raylo culture, and Raylo has
A
really,
little bit.
yeah, a little bit, a little bit. I mean, hey, you have blue butterflies in your Twitter account.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Um, but I mean, and here's the thing, like, I can completely understand and want to enjoy a film from every single perspective, and I love to get these different things. But there are people who reacted incredibly negatively to people who dared to say that, hey, there is some sort of romance involved. Now, as Jason Fry put it, it may not be traditional romance, but these people literally have been inside each other's heads, which is something that nobody in our world can even experience. So there's a certain intimacy. But why do you think, just because that's something that you identified with, and
Mhm.
many people identified with and wanted to learn more about and see more about, why is that such a challenge for people to accept? Is it because it's not their Star Wars, or what are your thoughts on that?
The first word that came to my mind is vulnerable, because it forces people to feel very vulnerable. It's one of
Mhm.
the most vulnerable things you can do, is to put yourself out there romantically, or you have feelings for each other. I mean, that's why they call them crushes
Right.
initially, is because you get crushed like half the time. But you
Mhm.
have to be vulnerable. You have to take risks. You have to go out on a limb and go, "Hey, do you like me?" I mean, do you really not just as a friend, like, do
Right.
you
Do you
yeah.
like me? Right.
Exactly, and when we see something like that on screen that we're not used to, especially, like, uh, Han and Leia was such magnetism, but he very much made her feel uncomfortable, got into her space,
Right.
and I mean, I could go down a different tangent road with that, but got into her space. The thing with Kylo and Rey is that it very much, and we know this now, uh, with Ryan's recent interviews, that he did play it romantic. He did base it off Pride and Prejudice, and I think that's another thing why people, certain parts of the fandom go, oh, I don't want to touch it. Like, it's because it's Jane Austen. It's because it's
Right.
Charlotte Bronte. It's because it's this uh, old world style of writing that females and female identifying people have latched onto
Right.
and have brought into this space where, oh, you know what, that's just a romance novel, or that's for girls, or that's this and that's that. I think if more men read Jane Austen
Mhm.
and read Bronte and Gaskell and all these great literary women, they would have seen the signs that were there. The power of touch is very, it's we did a video a couple years ago. It was called The Romance of Restraint. Everything
Mm.
in The Last Jedi is about restraint. You see that in Pride and Prejudice, where just a touch can send people flying, but it's because back then you did not hold hands walking down the street. You did
Right.
not kiss each other in public. I mean, everything was very restrained and refined, and you did those things privately. But just because those are things that are done in private, I mean, it accentuates that action even more. You
Mm.
see in the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice where Elizabeth and Darcy walk past each other and they brush hands, and it's like this spark, this electric spark. And
Mm.
I think in movies now, and you can say even in the last 20 years, everything is bam, instant gratification, and there's so much sex, there's so much violence, there's so much nudity, and add another adjective and it's there, and it's just instant gratification, and wham bam, moving on. It's in graphic in your face, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I
Right.
think people become very desensitized. So when they see something very subtle like a hand touch or a force bond, and they're getting closer and closer. I mean, the symbolism in the force bonds where, Rey is under the Falcon and it's raining and the water's dropping, and the next moment Kylo's on the other side, but these sparks are flying down and he's watching something industrial happening, and it's supposed to be fire and water. And I think people have lost the ability to see these subtleties in romance, and
Mm.
because you have to be vulnerable in order to people don't want to be vulnerable, and I get that. It's scary, it's frightening. If you don't feel comfortable with that in real life, that's probably not going to feel really good when
Mm.
you see it on
Right.
screen as well.
I wonder if that's why uh we have that kind of not my Luke Skywalker perspective, and maybe
Yeah.
it's a bigger statement. It's like this is not what I expect to see in a Star Wars movie, right? It's this
Oh
is
yeah.
uh,
I'm the first to admit I saw The Last Jedi and walked out of the theater. Um and I went, It took my second viewing to really go, okay, what is really happening here?
right,
And then definitely talking to M, it really, and then my third view, and I was like, okay, men and women aren't listening to each other. You
right,
see Rey and Kylo, even in the Force bonds, they're not really listening to each other, and he's telling her hard truths. Poe and Holdo aren't listening to each other. At least Poe's not listening to Holdo. Finn isn't listening to Rose. So the whole time you're going through these three different scenes in this circle, and it's just about the opposite sex not listening
mm,
to each other. Um, and that really actually made me appreciate the Poe and Holdo moments a lot more than I did in my first viewing. But isn't just the battle of the sexes? It's just Ryan took that and went, everyone's going to have conflict in this second film. I mean, it's what happens in the second
right.
film. You see that in Empire Strikes Back, and you see
Yep.
that in Attack of the Clones, but everyone was trying to get their words in, trying to be heard in The Last Jedi.
It's interesting too because I think it's you're 100% right in that it was sort of a disconnect between two people, but people who I don't think it helped that it came out at a very sort of high tension time
It did
in this
not.
country and in the
And I
world
was
because
gonna mention that later too. Yeah, it was people want their films to be escapism. And yes, of course,
yeah,
you can make the argument that the OT, paralleled Vietnam and blah blah blah. I'm not blah blah in Vietnam. I'm just saying, that's
right,
also like a tangent.
yep,
But people want to escape. People want to forget about what is going on out there. And for 2.5 hours, they just want to escape in their
hmm,
seat.
yep,
And when, I think when Last Jedi came out, it was Me Too, it was Trump, it was all these things. And people were just like, it's so loud. I need
mm,
to escape. And then they
yep.
go into The Last Jedi, and The Last Jedi is what it is, The Last Jedi. And they're like, I didn't escape at all.
But do you think? I mean, the argument often is that Ryan Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy are shoving a political agenda down our throat, when reality is perception, right? But from
Right.
my perception, it was a not. I never saw it as Haldo shutting down a man. I saw it as a loudmouth subordinate being insubordinate to a superior and had to deal with the consequences. I saw it
Hmm.
and again, I think it kind of goes
Oh, he
back
would have
to
been court-martialed. I
sure,
mean,
right, and it didn't matter
hands
if it was
down.
Akbar or Haldo. It was he was disagreeing on the bridge with his superior. Can't do that. And Luke's decisions, the fact that Luke was dealing with all the emotional baggage and everything that comes along with it, and
Hmm.
the 30 years in between movies that we don't see it on screen, but we can only make the assumption if we were told in The Force Awakens he ran away from everything. um so it I never saw it as here's another politically correct lesson
Right.
from Hollywood know-it-alls trying to shove a message. To me, it was a
Hmm.
reflection of the way the characters are, and it just so happens that they were putting themselves in situations that kind of mirrored some of the really crummy situations that were going on in our world. And that's the I think therein lies some of the biggest challenge with Last Jedi for the audience, is that, to your point, it's not it's not pure escapism, right? It's not
Right.
Death Star trenches and robots.
Hmm.
It's both. It's a heavy movie, and much like you, and I've said this on my show 100 times. When I walked out of The Last Jedi, I said to my friend, this was both the best and worst Star Wars movie I've ever seen, because
Hmm.
it was so, I knew there was such a story there, but I was
Hmm.
like, I feel like I was exhausted emotionally,
Yes.
and that's not what you get from Star Wars. Star Wars, you walk out exhilarated, and I
Yeah.
walked out like, oh man. And then, to your point, second and third time, I started to understand the story. I started to get a hold of this is what Luke went through. I started
Hmm.
to really appreciate um I really started to appreciate Ray and Kylo's relationship. Again, it's funny. I never jumped to the full-on romance, but I am so appreciative of people who brought that perspective from, you were talking about some of your literary history, and you applied
Hmm.
that, and clearly Ryan had that as a perspective, and you picked up on it, and that's what worked in that story for a lot of people. And I don't think that that makes it a bad Star Wars movie. It makes it a very deep and difficult and personal slash intimate Star Wars story.
Yes.
And that's a different type of movie.
Yes. Absolutely. Intimate is a very good word for it. Definitely with our art, dramatics, English, lit backgrounds, so many people, lots of women and women identifying saw this. And with our knowledge of the classic literature of Jane Austen, Bronte, this, going ever on, we went, it's that.
Yeah.
It is Jane Eyre in space. It is Pride and Prejudice in space.
Mhm.
And it's not having such a background. You'll go into the film, and if it's your first viewing, you're going to come out of there and go, what did I just watch? Like you said, it's my favorite and least favorite Star Wars film.
Right.
And that's kind of the genius of Ryan, where he's forcing people, for better or for worse, to question, to see it again,
Hmm.
to talk to other people. And yeah, it is hands down probably the most intimate Star Wars film.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because my perspective, again, it is now, it generally comes, every time I order the films, there's a different reason why one is moved or another. So
Yep.
um but I will admit, and I'd love to get your perspective, is it a Star Wars movie that you sit down and watch a lot or not? Like, honestly, I don't watch it as often. It's not the one that I go to. I go to pieces of it, similar to you in The Phantom
Right.
Menace.
Right.
I go to pieces of it. But it's the movie that I've thought the most about, I think. Do you watch it a lot?
The last time I watched it all the way through, being the type of content creators we are, I've certainly
Right.
watched certain scenes like Bam Bam. It is a longer film, so to try to
True.
find the
That's
time
true.
to sit down and analyze it is a little difficult. But the for May the 4th, we were approached by not StreamYard, Stream Lounge, which
Uh-huh.
is a new streaming platform, and they had a May the 4th celebration, and they asked if we would like to stream The Last Jedi, and we did, and it was amazing. So that is the first time in a while that I've actually watched the whole film from start to finish. And even then, like it being, going on 3 years, I found things that I really didn't see before.
Right.
But I tend to not. Emma's very different. She will put it on when she's cleaning. She will put it on when she's cooking. I mean, she will watch it front to back to front. Like, doesn't matter to her. For me, I tend to be in movie moods,
Okay.
and same with music. I'll listen to a song over and over again, and I'll love it. But with films, it's the same, where I tend to not watch it over and over and over again, because I know there'll be. I don't want that magic to go away. I don't want it to I don't wanna become desensitized
Right.
to certain aspects, and I certainly started feeling that when I was constantly analyzing it.
Yeah.
So I did take a step back, and I took a step back from a lot of the Star Wars films, um, just so I could come back into them at certain moments with almost, but not quite, but almost fresh eyes again.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's like, it's a very, like I said, it's an emotionally exhausting
And it's
film.
personal. Sorry to interrupt you. It's
Yeah.
personal for everyone. And I think that's why when The Last Jedi came out, there was such ferocity from both sides of loving it and hating it, that because it's a personal baby to everyone. The franchise is a personal thing for everyone, and you want to protect that. And I can't blame people. I mean,
Mhm.
there are certain people who will clickbait and are doing it for money
Yep.
and this, but I have had conversations with the people who are deeply hurt by what happened to Luke, and I don't blame them.
Yep.
I do feel like they're putting the blame on the wrong people. I mean, JJ put Luke on Octu, not Ryan.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but you
I'm
look at
I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna make
yeah,
that my argument from now on, because it 100%, I didn't even think of it that way for
yeah,
some reason. I don't know why, but you are 100% right. Yeah.
yeah. Luke, I mean, JJ put Luke into exile. JJ started that off of, Luke, Han saying everything he did about Ben, and that was the tipping point. And I feel that people do forget, and there have been wonderful threads on Twitter. I'm not the first to say this, but so much damage was done to the Skywalker family and Solo family, that how could you not? I mean, Luke losing his father, Luke losing his adoptive parents, Leia losing her
Right.
adoptive parents. I mean, and then finding out this knowledge that, it getting out Darth Vader was this father. I mean, add it all in. How could there not be trauma? How could there not be all of this building up, all this scar tissue? You're trying to push it down. In the midst of all this, Luke is trying to help Leia feel the Force, and then she literally feels Ben inside of her. This is a pulsing, living band of light. I mean, so now Leia's but Luke's off, looking for his stuff, and she feels alone, but yet she still feels in the Force. I mean, it's all over the place. Plus, she
Yeah.
and Han are having problems. I'm like, it's all over the place. And now you have this Force sensitive child who's like going nuts, and I don't know how to raise him. And where's Luke? And one, I think
Yeah.
Luke will be the best for him. I mean, it's just, it's so much. And these are for fictional characters.
Right.
So,
Well, and it's interesting because you even referenced Lord of the Rings, and
mhm,
Lord of the Rings, while having some of that onion peeling in there, is still ultimately about, it doesn't dig into, how much pressure's on Frodo, like how much, like this responsibility to return. So that's there, but it's not examined to the depth.
it's certainly Peter, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, they certainly had a road ahead of them
Yeah.
to try to make Frodo more susceptible to what the ring was doing. In the
Right.
book, you see that and you read that, but Tolkien being Tolkien is like takes a really long time to say. Like I feel like
Right.
Tolkien probably like really identified with the Ents and how long it took to, tell something. But you see that more in the film, just how burdensome being a ring bearer is.
Right.
And you definitely see that, and I feel this parallel. Oh, this is content right here. It's like I'm also like putting this in the back of my brain, paralleling uh Frodo and Luke, where you see Frodo at the end, and he's writing the Red Book of Westmarch, and he's finishing it and finishing Bilbo's stories and putting it all together, and still, even though it's been years, the journey has now weighed on him so much that he now has to go to the Undying Lands in order
Hmm.
to heal, because
Yeah.
it's just this adventure, this trauma, this weight can only be lifted there. And his friends don't understand. I feel that was Luke,
Hmm.
where of course it would be so traumatic to even have an inkling of a thought of, oh my gosh, I looked into my nephew's mind and I saw what he was going to become and how much destruction that would be, not only from his hand, but the trickle down effect to everything else around him.
Hmm.
And I felt that was such, beautiful is not the right word, but it was a beautiful moment that Ryan captured because it was all perspective. And for me, knowing what I know about Luke, that would have ripped Luke apart, which it
Right.
did, which we saw. So why
Yep.
wouldn't that be the icing on the cake to make him exile himself? Plus, he thought, he didn't see, he thought Kylo struck down the rest of his students and took some with him.
Right.
Obviously, that's not the case, and we see that in um, extended comic literature. But for Luke, oh my God, this is my fault. And what if I would have just talked to him? What if I did this? All these what ifs go through his
Yeah.
mind. I mean, and then coming at the end and Crate being all about atonement, holy cow,
Yeah.
the salt, the blood, everything.
Yep.
Going, and it's twofold, going to help the resistance and help his sister,
Yep.
but also apologizing to his nephew and knowing full well that he's going to want to strike me down. He is that upset, and I will let him,
Yep.
because if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, but it
Yep.
will wreck you. It'll hurt you just like you struck down your father. But Luke lets him do it. Why? Because it's just like he needs to get that out.
Hmm.
And it was the most badass moment. I remember my whole theater cheering when they saw Luke
Yeah.
cross-legged back on Octu. They just went wild. They
Yeah.
went wild,
It,
and ugh,
it's funny because even look, when the guy who wrote the novelization of it says on my show that he said, I'm not going to go down and face down the entire First Order with a laser sword in my
yeah,
hand,
yeah,
and that's what he does. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that's so difficult, and this is why it's a dangerous path to tread. But the reality is, when somebody has a problem with this movie that's so deeply rooted, it's not what their arguments are, because Luke
mhm,
actually gave
mhm,
us all that badass moment that we wanted to see from the comic books, where he was literally standing in front of five Imperial First Order
exactly.
walkers, and they fired on him, and they attacked him. And what did he do to do that? Not only did I think your point is 100% accurate in that not only did he go there, and I think that's the thing that people need to remember when they think about that scene, is he went there to save Leia as much as he
Yes,
went there to save or try to save Ben, right?
yes,
And what's more powerful than that? And the fact that he knew he had to give his life to do it, whether he was struck down literally, which is a way they could have done that scene,
yes,
um, or or the way he did it through this forced projection, which sucked the life out of him, was, it's just a different way to do the same exact thing. We just got it in a way, and it becomes a very lazy argument to say that that was not the Luke Skywalker that I wanted. And I think that's a very um that's a very weak argument against that film. And then to then say that at the same time, to pile on the I'm being thrust with a political agenda, it's lazy. It's as lazy as some of the writing in
yeah.
The Rise of Skywalker, but that's a whole other conversation another
Mhm.
time.
There's a big difference between that is not the Luke I wanted and that is not Luke.
Correct. Yes.
And it's it's amazing that that Luke Skywalker projected from Octu is the Luke everyone wanted. Badass. The score that is running behind him is badass. He's silhouetted in the doorway like a frickin' John Wayne Western. I mean, he is walking out there and facing his nephew. And
Mhm.
and the moment I love that he got to see his sister, and that bond is so strong that she felt him. I love the kiss that was ad-libbed by
Yeah.
Hamill. Oh my god. But that bond is so strong between the two of them, and he puts the dice in her hand and said no one is ever really gone, and that is twofold. That is Han and that is her son.
Yep.
And the fact that and from a mother's perspective now, she is the one silhouetted and hearing and seeing her son's ship coming at her. And it's very much parallel to Emperor Strikes Back, where she has to close the doors on Han and he and Luke, and they are somewhere out there. And
Yeah.
now she's closing the door on her son and Luke, and they are somewhere out there. And
Mm.
she is alone again. Oh, it's just I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Well, and there's your feminine gaze again, right? Because we
Yes,
see
exactly.
we feel that emotion and that pain, not because Luke stopped by,
Right.
but because we see the way she had to deal with it. and and
Yes.
and I
That
hadn't
is the feminine gaze.
I hadn't thought about what you said about the Hoth relationship as
Mhm.
well, because that's 100% correct too, because that was very early in the relationship, but the feelings were strong, and now she's lived through 30 years with both of them, and there it is again, and her son is out there with them. So
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
that's an amazing way to look at it. I love that. That's great.
I can't claim that as my own. Again, there's so many, women out there, bloggers, meta writers, what have you. And again, it's hard because they're writing beautiful analysis. But then that is I wouldn't call it an echo chamber, but you don't have the part of the fandom that would need to see that, seeing that. reading that,
Right.
listening to it, understanding it. And it's only through collaborations like this where any of those types of thoughts can go out to a broader audience.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for asking us and having me on. It's really the one of the ways that people can hear just a different perspective.
Well, I appreciate that as well,
Mhm.
and I'm glad to have you on, and because I think, as I mentioned before we got on, in my perception, because I'm not in the, um, I'm not, I come at the franchise from a slightly different
Of
perspective, of
course.
course.
Mhm.
But one of the last things I wanted to ask you about is, has the so the Raylo attacks. Gosh, I'm
Mhm.
gonna get beat up for putting it that way. The Raylo pressure.
It's true.
Yeah. Um,
From
they
a certain point of view, it's true.
yeah, from
Yeah, yeah.
everything.
Like how I did that?
If we've learned nothing else, it's all
Yeah.
from a certain point of view,
Yeah.
right? But the Raylo social media positioning had it really ramped up before The Last Jedi. I mean, before Rise of Skywalker.
Mhm.
And where is it now? Where do you see are people who have this really close attachment to Last Jedi like yourself? Are you still in your own group? Has it subsided at all? Is it gotten worse? I mean, what's or is it still the same? Has the social media or even probably just general interactions with people who don't see The Last Jedi the way you do, has that changed at all?
It's really like macro and microeconomics, where you have ebbs and flows and a roller coaster, and some days it's really great, and then all of a sudden the next day, it's like, what the hell just happened? Like, what bomb just exploded? It's very interesting being a content creator in this space when you're quote unquote a Raylo,
Mhm.
where some people want everything to do with you, and then another part don't want anything to do with you. I love seeing, and I'd say I love loosely, but I think it's very interesting and I get very analytical with it where I'll see someone follow us and say on Twitter
Mhm.
and it's another channel. I'm like, "Oh, cool." And then I click them and then I refresh and then I'm like, "Oh, they're not following us anymore. Oh."
Right.
I wonder why that is. But then I talked to Matt from Blue Bantha Milk Co. about
Mhm.
this, where I completely stopped looking at our analytics and
Yeah.
I completely stopped looking at our numbers and our growth and who unfollows us and who's following us. And uh I feel I'm leading a healthier life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always been
Yeah.
one of the people, and I think that's why Em and I work so well together is because her strengths and I have weaknesses and vice versa, and we come together and we have this very, cohesive flow.
Mhm.
When she needs lifting up, I lift her up, vice versa. Um, but being such a casual fan of Star Wars before becoming a content creator, and I was saying this to you before, I really have this out of box experience of all of it as well, where I'll see all this discourse and I'm like, well, I gotta go to work. I gotta make dinner. I got to go on a walk. My husband and I are going out of town. Like I gotta,
Yeah.
I gotta do all these things. And I think it's because Star Wars is so personal, getting back to that, where people feel like they have to keep fighting for it and what they believe it is and what their perception of it is. And that certainly is important. And, you know, I feel like fight the fights that need fighting, but
Right.
don't spread the fire.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the cancel culture is a very interesting thing. I mean, it became so much that there's a moment we had to go on hiatus from Twitter's a cesspool of evil. I'm just going to throw that out there. It became so much that we went on hiatus and then I just unfollowed everyone. I'm like, cool, we can't get canceled if I'm not following anybody.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
I can't handle when, and I get it's coming from a good place, but there'll be people who will DM us, and this is all over like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Like, oh, did you see this person posted and you're following them? Did you know you're following them? I'm like, okay, I first of all, I don't even know what's going on.
Right.
Second, let me look into this and see what's happening. Um, and sometimes it's like, oh God, okay, like I don't agree with that. But other times it's like, okay, well, they do have every right to say what they just said. And I I literally sit there like I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Do
Well,
I keep following them and risk people canceling us and getting upset? Or do I, you know, what do I do in this space being a content creator? Like it's very it can be a very mean girl. It can be
yep.
very clicky, and it's it's nuts so. It's nuts so. And then you have other fandoms like coming in and jumping in and putting their 2 cents, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm in my late 30s. I can't believe I'm dealing with this bullshit.
Yeah, I'm still dealing. Well, it's funny. Matt Harrington here, one of our patrons, said he has no problem with anyone's Star Wars views or opinions as long as they're not trolling or bullying other fans. And I think that
I agree with that.
that's, it's funny. I said to you before we got on that I've taken sort of this take no prisoners kind of attitude, and or actually more like take no bullshit sort of attitude when
Mhm.
it comes to Twitter. It's like, look, either be a decent person or don't. And if you're not, go away. And it's
Mhm.
very clear when people are trolling, and it's very clear, there's people who literally just look for somebody to say something positive about Ryan Johnson and then jump all over that comment. And to me, that's not just a trolling. That's a very sad way to live your life. But there's that next level of, I hear what you're saying, and I do agree. Like, as I alluded to, The Rise of Skywalker to me is my number 11 Star Wars film of all
Mhm.
11 films,
Mhm.
and for multiple reasons. But it doesn't mean that I don't like the movie. It doesn't mean that I don't
Right.
respect the rest of the franchise. It doesn't mean that if it's their number one and I know people who where it is, that's fantastic, and I love that. Never should anybody have that sort of ownership. I don't own Star Wars. Girls
Right.
with Sabers doesn't own Star Wars.
Correct.
Honestly, Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, and Disney, they own the rights, but they don't own it's all of ours, right?
Right.
And I think people
Yes.
lose sight of the phrase, Star Wars is for everyone. It means, my son who's 8 years old and loves Clone Wars, that's his Star Wars. Does he watch the movies? He doesn't have the attention span or interest really in
Right.
watching the original trilogy because it's Star Wars. But does that mean he's not a Star Wars fan? Hell no. He's got
Right.
piles of toys and he
Yeah.
loves Star Wars and he loves what it brings to him. And if you got something out of The Last Jedi that made you feel like they're listening to the way I want to receive stories, then it's a win. And if you didn't like it, there's 10 other movies you can watch. There's other
Exactly.
content. The way I always put it, and for some reason people don't who want to disagree with me find every reason not to. But it's just like your favorite band. Look, I've been a Metallica fan since they first came out in the 80s.
Mhm.
The last couple of albums have done nothing for me, but I haven't thrown out my other Metallica albums. I
Right.
still can put those on and enjoy them. I still
Right.
love them. And if somebody loves the new stuff, God bless you. Let's talk about what we love together. And I'm not going to yell at you because I don't like the mix of a particular song. It's just that doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. I mean, there's still Metallica.
Right.
There's
Right.
still the band.
Yep.
Um, yeah, again, it really took so Girls with Sabers were not huge Tross fans,
Right.
but we did, and it was very crazy for us because your brain does not understand that this isn't real. So when you see a beloved character die on screen, and you can make the same argument for the people who watch their beloved Luke die on screen,
Yep.
they're going through a grief process. The brain sees a real human being go away, and then you're having this bodily, like, neurological reaction, and your brain's like, oh shit, you're grieving, I got to do what I got to do.
Right.
So they're sending you in the stages of grief. The same thing happens with Ben Solo. We had hundreds, and I am not shitting you, hundreds of messages on social media and emails and DMs and comment sections, and people going, I'm an adult, but I literally just sat and cried over this.
Yeah.
Everyone's feelings are different, but everyone's feelings are valid. And your brain does not understand that this is not a real person, but it sees human form on the screen. So your body's going through this reaction and you have to just go with it. Now, my grieving process, boom, Ben dying. God, that sucked.
Yep.
Okay, I have to go home and I got to work the next morning.
Right. Right.
M, on the other hand, had a very long grieving process, but that's not wrong. That is what it is. And the same thing with Rey. A lot of people did not like Rey Skywalker. A lot of people did not like how that ended,
Mhm.
but there were people who did. And I remember explaining this to M. Did I really care for Rey Skywalker? No, but I understood it, and I
Yeah.
understood why people loved it. And I'm so glad that we ended up making our video essay about Rey Skywalker and why that resonated with people. And it's actually one of my favorite video essays that we
Mm.
did. And not that that changed my opinion,
Right.
but it made me understand why it was so important to a lot of people.
Yep.
And that's what I just ask from people who are still naysayers and trollers and whatever have you, that try to see this through someone else's eyes.
Mhm.
Like, why would The Last Jedi appeal to so many people?
Yep.
And if I can just get through to one person, then it's all worth it.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's a really great point. It's try to ask why don't you like something, or why do you like something? And
Yeah.
and see, this is where the fandom menace issue is, or the trollers, or the online bullies, as Matt was referencing before.
Mhm.
Um, that's where the problem is look, I mean, and I'm sure if we talked for another hour, we would find things that we disagree on
Of
in
course.
Last Jedi, right?
Mhm.
But a good conversation asks why you disagree with me, and I look, it's Star Wars fandom is not about winning. It's not
Correct.
about being it's not about making sure that you are correct, that you are gatekeeping. If
Mhm.
it's any fan, and I say Star Wars fandom, but it's any fandom.
Yeah.
Um it's more about shared enjoyment. And if you don't have that, then maybe this isn't the right place to hang out. And this is why I have that take no prisoners, take no shit sort of perspective lately,
Mhm.
is look, I don't do you want to have a conversation about why I thought Last Jedi worked and you didn't? Let's do that. That's great. Let's have that conversation. It's funny. I posted on Twitter the other day. I walked into my chiropractor's office. I was wearing one of my Star Wars shirts,
Uh-huh.
and we started talking, and I spent 25 minutes work talking about Star Wars while he's
Right.
like cracking
Yeah,
my back
Justin,
and
you
stuff.
Yeah.
um but it's funny because he's like, how did you feel about Last Jedi? And I was like, oh no, how's
Yep, here
this
we
gonna
go.
go?
You find
And
out everyone asks that, like, that's what they lead off with.
right, that's kind of like, that's the litmus test. That's the
Yep, litmus test.
um and he was like, because I didn't like it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I actually liked it. And he's like, oh really, would you? And I change his mind? Absolutely not.
No.
Did he think different of me? No. I mean, we were able to have a conversation, and because
Yes.
two reasons. One, he's a professional adult, and number two, it wasn't on Twitter, so he couldn't
Yes.
shout and then run away. He couldn't
Yes.
say you're an idiot and whatever else they want to say on
Right.
Twitter and run away. It forced to have a conversation. Um, I was in my GameStop one day and I was buying some Star Wars pops. Surprise, surprise.
Mhm.
And a guy standing there was like, "Oh, I did not like the sequel trilogy." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Why?" And we just had a great conversation. And I think because, and you may feel this too, is because we spend time on Twitter, when somebody starts there, like immediately we're like, "Oh no, where's this going to go?" And
Yeah.
then you realize that in real life, people are going to have a conversation about it, which is where it should be. And blowing off steam in Twitter is not great. You and I talked about it before we got on, about that sort of, when you get attacked for the first time by an opposing viewpoint in Twitter and they come at you hard, it's literally, it's scary.
Yes.
And I for the people who use social media and use content creation and use fandom as a place to deal with the horrific things this world has thrown at us the last couple of
Mhm.
years, um it can be soul crushing. It can be more than that. It can literally lead to people going to the ultimate extreme and dealing with their depression and dealing with their challenges. And I don't understand the value to pushing somebody there, and what kind of a person takes that kind of joy in going after you because you happen to see a different perspective in The Last Jedi than I did, and going at you hard and calling you names and sending your friends after you. It makes no sense. And I don't understand how that is something somebody wants to do unless they have an even more challenges in their life that they're taking out there. It's just I'm not expressing it properly, probably because of the
No,
cold
I
medicine, but you know where I'm
completely
going.
understand where you're going and what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will be the first one to admit that there is safety in anonymity.
Yep.
And when no one can see your face, especially on a platform like Twitter, and you're not creating to the point where people are seeing your face. And I'm not saying that's no one should do that, but
Right.
you're putting yourself out there, especially if you're showing your face and telling people your real name.
Right.
Um, and there's a level of trust and vulnerability, and I am allowing you to come into a personal space such as this
Mhm.
and watch me talk and watch me create. And with social media, the majority of people are followers and subscribers who don't do that. Maybe, yeah, their photo isn't their icon or their
Sure.
whatever, but and maybe their real name is up there. But for the most part, they are communicating in anonymity, and inhibitions tend to go away with that. And everything's a hot take.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
feel that this is a very generational thing too. I certainly feel that I am old enough to where I I wouldn't call it getting the best of both worlds, but
Mm.
my toes were certainly dipped in both pools at the same time, where I had the luxury of sitting down and having a normal fan conversation with friends. Like, we weren't online, we were just talking about it.
Mhm.
Literally people sitting in front of me where I can see their face, I can read their expressions, and I can hear their tone. You
Yep.
get none of that on the day-to-day basis that is social media, Twitter, Facebook,
Yes.
Instagram. So, if you're already coming in and reading something irritated, you're gonna read it like they had an irritated tone. You're
Yeah.
giving and you're assuming their tone, you're assuming they're hostile, or, put anything you want there. It now becomes a game of assuming.
Yep.
And a lot of times projecting, a lot of times people's words are taken out of context.
Mhm.
Only one tweet is shown, but yet there was a slew of other tweets before
Right.
that or after that. Um, but again, that is, I feel it's just very generational, where younger people, this is what they know. This is how they interact. It's
Yep.
very fast paced, and you can say that about every generation, saying the next generation is very
Sure.
fast paced, but it is a tweet literally happens in seconds and it's there, and you can't edit it. You can only delete it,
Yep.
and blocking and whatever have you. And I think both can be said for sides. Getting back to the Raylo fandom, I feel it's interesting that people outside the fandom talking about Raylos, they don't know how to talk about them or
Right.
one certain aspect. So then, I mean, you could say the same thing about the Fandom Menace. So this goes both ways, but they all get lumped together.
Yep.
So I do take issue with that. But again, my out of box perception of all this is that is the nature of the beast,
Mm.
where the only thing that maybe will curtail and stop that is the dialogue that you and I are having right now.
Yeah.
But you can't stop people putting entire fandom all to one side and calling everyone one thing. You just have to talk to one person at a time and
Yeah.
do the groundwork and the heavy lifting and go door to door, page to page, talking to people and hoping they hear you.
Yeah. And I think the challenge though, and I don't disagree with you, and I think
Mm.
conversations like this are super important. But I also feel like I've tried to change the one or two, the people who are willing to have the conversation, and I find that, and maybe I'm generalizing, and I probably am,
Mhm.
probably, and it's probably because of the echo chamber that we are in,
It's
right? I
a
mean,
huge echo chamber.
yeah,
Mhm.
if you and I were to look at who follows Girls with Sabers and who follows Around the Galaxy, it's probably a pretty big Venn diagram, right? And
Mhm.
so for to try to change the minds of those that I've tried to, it's so frustrating. And to your point, and I love what you're saying. You do need to. It's like Rose said, right? I hate to be cliched, but it's like she said, that's how we're going to win, but not by
Yeah.
fighting but what we hate, but
Hate
by fighting
saving
for
what we love.
saving what we love.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, and that's, I think that's probably the best advice I would give anybody on Twitter right now, or anybody who's dealing with this, is like, just don't get in those conversations. Open the door and say, hey, you want to talk about it? And as soon as it turns into reading off the Fandom Menace cheat sheet that they've been given, that they're supposed to read off of because they got it from their Geeks and Gamers
Oh my god. Yeah.
click site,
Yep.
then you're done. I'm done. Thank you. We're not having this conversation. Hey, talk to me about why that wasn't your Luke Skywalker, because you may have a really great point, and I'm curious. I may never agree with it, but I want to hear your point. My chiropractor, why didn't he like that Luke Skywalker? That's cool. I get it. Um, but you need to curate what you're a part of in fandom. And as you were saying before, it is great to have come from a spot where you started these conversations literally sitting in dorm rooms and
Mhm.
having conversations and meeting people. And that's something that doesn't exist now. People can
No.
shout at me all they want, and I can shout at them all they want,
Mhm.
but that just really doesn't get you anywhere.
It's hard because people are still angry. People are still grieving. Again, this whole process, starting
Yep.
even with The Force Awakens.
Yep.
I'm not even gonna get into the prequel craziness because, again, I was online with Lord of the Rings, so I
Yep.
saw a little bit of prequel craziness, and I'm
Mhm.
like, "Whoa, that is way too much for me. I'm just gonna stay over here where people, are purists and want Tom Bombadil, like, it's still safe over here." So, but I get it. People want to fight and protect what is uh, they love and what is personal to them and meaningful, and I completely understand that, but it does. It's just you're if you can have obviously toxic negativity and you can have toxic positivity.
Yep.
So I feel the type of dialogue, it needs to be a sweet spot where it's just enough, but yet you're not feeding the beast in another way. So it is a big challenge. It's a big
Yeah.
challenge even for us as a channel, for talking about our dislikes, to um keep things positive, but yet share what doesn't work for us.
Right. And that's a very fine line, because we do live
Yeah.
in this, as you were saying before, this culture where, if I lead off a conversation and say, I did not like The Rise of Skywalker, people will have stopped listening to me before I talk about why and what I
Mhm.
liked about it, and where, because again, as I said, overall, will I watch it all the time? I would probably watch it more than Last Jedi, just simply because it's a more rollicking fate, space adventure than this. It's a more, for better or worse, it's more traditional Star Wars.
Mhm.
But the challenge is, we live in a world where, when you ask people to rank their Star Wars films, and every time I see somebody tweet that, what's your favorite Star Wars? I'm like, you're literally just looking because you want to start a conversation that will end poorly.
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
think that there's no sense in really, uh, I don't know. The challenge is for people like you and I, content creators, people who have opinions, people who, people want to know what you think. It's tough because you have to lead with, here's the thing, I don't like it, but, right, you have to throw that but in so quickly that it almost loses your perspective.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. It it's amazing how I do have a bigger appreciation of content creators now and
Yeah.
what everyone has to go through. But stepping away too, I mean, we are lucky that we do have a channel where we're able to do that.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, complete and utter respect for people who do this, and then it is their job. I mean, I have
Yeah.
a completely, 8 to 4 Monday through Friday job, and so I don't do this 100% of my time, but for the people who do, oh my god, kudos. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a roller coaster of one day you are on cloud 9, and the next your sales have been utterly deflated
Yeah.
because of one tweet
Yeah.
and how rapid fire it spreads. It's just insanity, but I always try to remember that.
Yeah.
And it goes back to how my journey started, where I try to remember being that 7-year-old sitting on the couch next to my sister and my mom, and a new hope starts.
Yeah.
And saving what I love.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a interesting fandom because there was such a gap between the original trilogy and the prequels, and what came between. The creator said, "Okay, you can do all those things, but it's not canon."
Right.
And then it really is not canon now.
Right. Yeah.
And now all those people who loved either all of it or none of it or a little bit in between, that's a whole 'nother subset. It's just the Star Wars fandom as a whole is a very interesting entity to be a part of.
Well, it's interesting because I've thought a lot about the fact that, a phrase that I've used a couple times is that Star Wars has become its own genre, right?
Yeah.
But more than that, it's 40 years of the modern day myth, right? And I often,
Mhm.
I at times, get a little bit bizarre and think about, well, in 1,000 years, people look back at this as our Greek gods, right? I know that's maybe a little bit extreme, but
Mhm.
the reality is people have so much connection to it because it survived, right? Nobody fights as much about Battlestar Galactica. Nobody fights as much about, some other really great, fun franchises. But this one has had legs for 44 years, and people have come into it and left it in different places. People have found things that they love about it and don't. I mean, again, I always reference my son because he's a Clone Wars kid, and he watched The Rise of Skywalker and he didn't care. He watched the Last Jedi. Wasn't that important to him yet. I mean, if as he grows and
Yeah, it
wants to
could
know
be.
more, it could be. But right, there's so many different ways to enjoy Star Wars that I do believe that you need to let people enjoy it however they want. And if the Jane Austen-ness of The
Yeah.
Last Jedi did it for you, awesome.
Yeah.
And if you didn't like the way Luke Skywalker's character was written, that's fine too. Go on to the next thing. And
Mhm.
I think we'll all be much happier. So,
I agree. I absolutely agree.
well, Luke, and I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this, and but it is, as you said, you got the 8 to 4. You got to get to that
Yeah.
tomorrow morning. So, tell people once again where they can find you.
So our main channel is on YouTube, so just search for Girls with Sabers and you'll see that special icon. Also, we are on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter. We have a Patreon page. We also have a TeePublic merch page. We're on Facebook, and soon we'll be on Apple and all those podcasty stations. But right now, YouTube is our home base, so that's where we are. And we do have Stream Lounge as well, so we're thinking of streaming movies, commentary along with that. But yeah, main channel is YouTube, and then you can branch out from there if you so wish.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well, Luthien, thank you so much for joining us. Give my best to M. Sorry
I
we missed her.
will.
And I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Pete. I loved being here. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Cool. Hey, before I let you go, if
Mhm.
you could give me hey, this is Luthien from Girls with Sabers, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy kind of thing, that would be awesome.
Yep. Okay. Hey, this is Luthien from Girls with Sabers, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Perfect. Love it. Good. Let me just hit this end.